Thank you, Mr Acting Deputy President. I'd like to raise for consideration in the Senate today the future of Australia's naval shipbuilding industry and dispel some of the myths and that colour perception around this issue. We are at a critical juncture. Within a month, we've had the launch of new ship Hobart, but we've also had the announcement by BAE that they won't respond to the Pacific Patrol Boat tender, which raises valid concerns about the future of Australia's naval shipbuilding industry. But I think it's important that we do dispel some of the myths so that we can get to the crux of the issue and see how we can work collectively as a parliament, as a nation, to ensure that this vital industry continues. The first of these myths is that reform is not required and somehow we can just continue as normal. Political leaders often claim that national security is the first and foremost role of government, but unfortunately actions don't always bear this out. Investment decisions in defence capability are long-term in nature, and neither the taxpayer, defence nor industry get value for money when defence is used as a political football. I've been advocating for some years the need to have a bipartisan defence plan, and that draws on the Danish approach to having a 5-year plan which is approved by the various parties in their parliament. And it provides medium to long-term stability for both the Defence Department and for the industry sector that supports them, and importantly, it lifts the capital productivity of the investment that stakeholders make into national security and defence. Now, ASPI very kindly sponsored a workshop with key stakeholders to discuss this proposal, and whilst undoubtedly there wasn't uniform agreement and there are some issues to work through, it is viable and it is by far preferable to our current approach. And for those who are interested, there's a paper on the ASPI website, and there's a link from my website where I explain that concept in some more detail. The First Principles Review also highlights that we can't continue as we are. It highlights that we need a paradigm shift in thinking to treat defence industry as a fundamental input to capability. Well, surprise, surprise, that means that defence and government have an interest in ensuring that key areas of industry remain commercially viable. This is a fundamental culture shift within defence, that we actually have an interest in the commercial success of industry, and we should find ways to constructively and collaboratively engage with them while still maintaining probity as we expend taxpayers' money. The defence industry policy that for years under both sides of government has been the penultimate chapter in a white paper, deliberately separated from defence procurement policy, it's no longer viable to go down that path. Instead, we need to see how our procurement policy interacts with our need to keep key areas of industry sustainable so that we decide on priorities and schedules, our approaches to procurement, and those, when they're submitted by defence to government, provide that pathway for sustainment. A practical example of this is provided by the RAND report, which has been recently produced, and it indicates that governments of Australia need to commit to a schedule and a scope of shipbuilding that removes the peaks and troughs, so that we actually keep those industry sectors viable. So that leads to the second myth that I want to dispel, that somehow the valley of death can be fixed by a decision overnight. The 23rd May launch of Hobart was a great celebration. It was a significant milestone in a process that started over a decade ago with the 2000 White Paper, the decision in 2005 to contract ASC as the shipbuilder, and in 2007 the selection of the hull design by Navantia. Note that time frame. The work occurring today was approved over 7 years ago. So given facts of this kind, of this time frame, the media releases that have come out today attacking the government because of BAE's decision are just examples of the shallow politics that we've arrived at in this nation, brazenly ignoring 6 years of inaction and no decisions by a Labor government to commission the construction of warships in Australia. If work on the AWD and LHD, both commissioned by the Howard government, is now just coming to a close, you don't have to be particularly partisan in nature to do the maths and work out that a decision for follow-on work to these programs would have had to have been made several years ago. This kind of shallow political attack just reinforces in my mind the need for a bipartisan defence plan where we can work collectively to agree a way forward that will lead to an affordable, sustainable and effective naval shipbuilding industry. The associated myth with this is that somehow we can just make a snap decision to get the ball rolling. Well, snap decisions have unintended consequences, and you just have to think of Pink Bat scheme with lives lost and money wasted. And that kind of unintended consequence is not something that we can chance when it comes to the equipment that the men and the women of the ADF will use when they are serving this nation. The third myth I want to dispel is that the government is not supporting the naval ship industry. As I said, we can't fix things overnight, but we can take steps. And the first of those is the Pacific Patrol Boat Program. In 2014, the government announced that it was bringing that program forward. The tender was released to industry, and as it happens, responses are due in exactly 18 minutes' time. 2 p.m. today, the tender closes, and so the government is taking steps to accelerate that program. The government's invested some $78 million to accelerate engineering studies of the viability of using the air warfare destroyer platform as the basis of future frigate, incorporating the Australian design and built CFAR radar. Now, the government's not afraid of facing bad news and problems. And so whilst the government's been criticised for highlighting management problems within AWD, as any business leader will tell you, the quickest way to go broke is to ignore problems. At estimates earlier this month, evidence showed that industry partners in the Air Warfare Destroyer Alliance were highlighting productivity issues within ASC as early as 2011-12. Despite this being flagged with the Department of Finance, who are the owner of ASC, and even the Secretary of Defence saying that he had to go and see his opposite number, things didn't improve. We now face the cost overrun that's been made very public of around $1.2 billion. Defence have indicated, though, that with the change of government and a willingness to face the issues within ASC, cooperation has increased and there has been a sustained increase to productivity. And the government's currently working to boost the industry expertise within ASC to ensure that this productivity continues. The other myth I want to dispel is that Australia can't build ships competitively. You've only got to look back to the Anzac class to see quality ships delivered on time and on schedule. Look at Austal, who provide 15% of the US Navy's fleet. They've exported some 92 naval vessels to 8 countries. And so clearly, comments about things like a 30 or 40% premium don't actually apply, particularly to the private sector. Estimates also gave evidence that the outturn cost for the third air warfare destroyer with these increased productivity measures is going to be in the order of $1 billion. So on top of that, you have to add other things for the whole program. But as you look forward to purchasing ships, what it says is if buy a hull from the Spanish is around $1 billion and to produce them here is around $1 billion, then the sunk cost we have made to establish the shipyard, do the first of type, build the ships, can't be factored into future and say this is how much it's going to cost us in the future. So we can build ships competitively. In terms of evaluating value for money, RAND highlights that the spillover effects are real and measurable, and they place the value for shipbuilding at around 1.7. Now, governments of both persuasions have consistently refused to consider that the generation of new intellectual property and productive capacity emerging from complex defence projects is valid to be considered as part of value for money, and this has skewed recommendations to governments of both persuasions for many years. This must change if the Australian taxpayer is to get value for money. Complex programs, and submarines and ships are certainly 2 examples of where this factor of 1.7 should be applied. And as I've mentioned frequently in this place, as you look through life, a small, unique fleet configuration demands that Australia create and sustain the ability to build, modify, repair and certify these platforms as safe for use, because this has been demonstrated to save money and increase availability over time. The other comment that's often made is Australia can't build quality. Well, again, I come back to Anzac, both the original ship and also the AMSD upgrade. That has proven to be well beating with the Australian-built CEA system and the Saab-designed, Australian Saab-designed combat system. In the light of the Coles report, we see that Collins is not a dud sub, it's actually a very capable platform. And whilst AWD has been delayed, one of the hallmarks of Australian things when we build them is that we will seek quality even if we have to change schedule, and so you can't say that it's not quality even if it is late and initially over cost. Finally, the myth that somehow the competitive evaluation process for future submarines is flawed. In the July edition of the Australian Pacific Defence Reporter, CEO of ThyssenKrupp, who are the German bidder, is quoted as saying that he welcomed the competitive evaluation process, and he said that, and I quote, "This was normal in Europe, where potential offers from prime contractors could be very different and difficult to compare. It offered the opportunity for dialogue with the Commonwealth before a fixed set of requirements was established. The reporter goes on to say, so Minister Andrews' decision was a good one in the circumstances. So in summary, Australia needs a viable shipbuilding industry as a fundamental input to maritime capability. We have and can continue to build the best ships at the best price, but it will take a long-term bipartisan approach. And if we do this, if we implement FBR and RAND, we will see affordable ships and a sustainable, continuous build of ships and submarines to support our defence capability.
Thank you. Thank you,